Welcome into Mishkan Katan. I'm your host, Gena Hood, and it's my pleasure to have in the studio with me today one of the luminaries of the Messianic movement and also a dear friend of mine and my husband's, Andrew Gabriel Roth. Andrew is the founder of One Faith, One People Ministries. He's a historian. He's a scholar and a linguist with a passion for biblical history and archaeology. For more than 2 decades as a teacher, an author, an international speaker, Andrew has used his expertise in biblical Hebrew and Aramaic to transport people back to the original context of the scriptures. And he's also helped people understand the politics of the first century along with that, because that's key to understanding the scriptures. He's also the author of the wonderful book, which I read several months ago, called Kidnapped from God, The Call to Come Home. And so I'm going to bring Andrew into the studio and welcome, Andrew. It's great to see you here today. This is a wonderful occasion to have you in the studio with us because we're here to talk about your latest book, or maybe I should say books, in a variety of different formats. It's a masterwork called The Apostolic Writings. It's available on Amazon, and I can tell that you put a lot of thought into how you were going to present this material to both the believing world and the skeptical world, because you present it in a variety of formats, right?
That's right. You know, this main one, the white, is basically the original idea that I had for the Apostolic Writings. And by the way, great to be with you, Gena, as always. And the Apostolic Writings is meant to tell not just accurately the story of Yeshua and the apostles, but to do so from the best Aramaic manuscripts in the world, some of which go back to the 4th century. And you know, different volumes are meant to address different situations. So, for example, the white one is meant also as an outreach to other Bible scholars to show that this text that I translate from, rather than being a product of the 5th century, which is what a lot of them believe, was actually very much in the 4th and 3rd centuries. And the way that we prove that is through the testimony of Aramaic saints who didn't speak a word of any other language. They didn't know Greek, they didn't know Hebrew. And so when they're quoting from a written source, it can only be from an Aramaic written text, which is the same text that we use here. So every time one of those Aramaic saints quotes something, I would have that referenced in the footnotes in the white. Right. But the other kind, which is the blue, is more focused on just the main points of the footnotes. The footnotes are the same in both versions. I can see you got the blue copy there. And that's called the reader's version. And the basic difference between the white and the blue here is that instead of saying Yerushalayim, which is what the white would do, which would retain the actual people and place names, or Yochanan, right? It would be Jerusalem and John, respectively, in the blue version. So this way, there's one that's speaking to the wider academic community as well as to the masses. And then there's another one that's speaking pretty much just to the masses to make it easier for them to sort of ramp up into this terminology.
Right. Yes, it makes perfect sense. Now, you also are going to be presenting this in an audiobook format at some point, correct?
Ebook, a Kindle. Audio is not out of the question. It's going to be a while before we get to do that. But we needed to roll this out in stages. And so part of the plan is currently, as you know, the white one and the blue one are available right now. And also right now, Amazon has got them half off.
I noticed that.
The retail price. That has nothing to do with us. We have no warning that they were going to do it. We'll get no warning when they stop doing it. I can just tell you that we're fine either way. They're going to give us what they've committed to, but they are aggressively discounting it so that it will sell well.
Great.
I have no idea when they will stop doing that. So if you guys see that price, I recommend you going for it because it will be gone without warning.
Right.
So, but the main thing is that each one of these we have planned to do an ebook.
Great.
We're not quite sure when those ebooks are coming out because we're also, as you know, about to travel for 6 weeks. And then we're also trying to get a compact, easier to carry version of the reader's version as well. So if we'll be rolling those out in stages, and then we'll have a commentary volume in 2025. So it's going to take a while for all the stuff to kind of come out.
Sure.
So, but at least we got these two for right now.
Yes, it's an excellent start. And I love that these two that we were just talking about are in large print. I'm going to open the book up and hold it up to the camera so that you can get an idea of the print size of this book. And
12 point.
Yes,
Makes it nice and big
and accessible to older readers such as myself.
Yeah, well, me too. I'm getting up there too. So
we're in that generation.
Yeah.
The main thing that makes this masterwork so unique is that you did use the earliest Aramaic manuscripts that you could find. And for me, as a longtime Protestant, it never occurred to me to even question that the books of the Brit Chadasha, the New Testament, were written originally in Greek. That is what I was told, that they were written originally in Greek. Told that most of my life.
Yeah.
But could you share with us, you've already mentioned some of this, but could you share with us the compelling evidence, some more of the compelling evidence of how this was not the case, that they were first written, the books of the New Testament were first written in Aramaic and then at some point translated into Greek, which is the language of the Roman Empire.
Okay, well, basically, we'll start at the 1,000-foot level and consider the founders of other world religions, right? That there is no doubt that the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is originally written in Hebrew, the language of the Hebrew people. That's easy.
Sure.
There's no doubt the Quran is originally written in Arabic, the language of their founder, Muhammad, right? There's no doubt that Hinduism and Buddhism were done originally in Sanskrit. Nobody questions these things. No one that I've ever heard, anyway. And the point is, if the New Testament is written originally in Greek, and I got no problem with it being translated anciently into Greek, but if it was originally done in Greek, it is telling us that they are the only world religion whose original scriptures are in a language other than their founder spoke.
Wow.
So even though this is the prevailing story that we are told in the churches and stuff like that, and in academia as well, you kind of have to peer behind a curtain a little bit and go, does that really make sense? Does it make sense for our Almighty Heavenly Father, Yahweh, to reveal 70% of his word in the language of his people, the Hebrew people, and then the remainder in the language of the pagan Romans who burnt the temple and left 1 million Jews dead in the streets? Does that even track? Now, there's more to it than that. For example, in some of your Bibles, it will say in Acts 1:19 that Aramaic was the language of the country. Okay, they called it the place Akeldama, the field of blood, but that is an Aramaic term, not a Hebrew term. Okay, when Yeshua heals the little girl that died, and he says Talitha Kume, he's speaking Aramaic because Talitha is not a Hebrew word. If he was speaking Hebrew, he would have said something like Neara Kume. So in the texts themselves, we have direct evidence. And of course, if we had 5 hours, I could show you, all of them, that Yeshua and the apostles are speaking the Aramaic language. And therefore, it makes best sense that they would be writing in the Aramaic language. I'll give you one other example about how we know that Aramaic is the original language. If you ever look at Matthew 26, verses 6 through 7, all your Bibles that are derived from Greek will say, and while dining in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came bearing an alabaster jar of perfume. Right? Now, you've studied the Torah, Gena. You know, I'm no surprise you're going to feel when I tell you that is impossible.
Right.
Lepers do not own houses.
Right.
And if they do, they don't live in those houses. They're in a leper colony. They have to avoid all human contact. And if they do come in contact, they have to cover their mouth with their hand and shout, Tameh, Tameh, unclean, unclean. And yet here is this leper house party going on in Matthew 26, right? So per Leviticus 13:45 through 46, that's an impossible reading, which makes that version historically unreliable. And that's a real problem in terms of apologetics and sharing the word. So that's the situation on the Greek side. So what was the answer? The answer had to do with one Aramaic word, actually two words that are spelled the same way, like lead and lead in English. They're both spelled G-R-B-A. Word number one, garba, leper. Word number two, also spelled G-R-B-A, garaba, but the same consonants, jar maker. So, like I've said this for a quarter century, I ask, what makes more sense? That a leper is giving a Martha Stewart event, all the Jews come, nobody complains, nobody's worried about being ritually impure, or a jar maker giving Yeshua a jar through a servant girl. Once you conclude that jar maker is the only possible reading, then the next step is to look at that the confusion can only happen from an Aramaic original text. Because in Greek, the words for leper and jar maker could not be more different.
Yes.
Right? So therefore, if the Greek got the meaning of the Aramaic word wrong, the only way to look at it is that the Greek came later to make that mistake. And the Aramaic was the original underlying text. And then, of course, I had to do a deep dive into the different types of manuscripts and found out how far back those manuscripts go and when they got standardized so that they're effectively identical today. And the stuff that I use was standardized in about the year 325.
That's very early.
Very early. You know, so compare that, say, to on the Jewish Bible, that you do not get an official text of the Hebrew Bible much before the year 1000. So which is better, 325 or 1000? I mean, granted, Gena, don't get me wrong. I would love it to be, they go, I wanted 3rd century. I wanted 2nd. Yes, so do I. But the fact of the matter is it takes time to sort of get all your books together. It takes time to argue about what reading is best, or what tradition takes place in which church. And so I'm not worried about that early 4th century date, because I have manuscripts that go up to 1613, 2 years after King James. These manuscripts are identical.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a place name, Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, a little bit different. But no major divergences for 22 of the 27 New Testament books.
Right.
And so I'll take this tradition over a situation like with the Greeks, that scholars found the Greek text to be so confusing that they divided them into families, right? So you never, the manuscripts themselves never say, I'm Byzantine, I'm Alexandrian, I'm Western. The scholars call them those things.
Right.
You know, and what you find out when you compare the families of these manuscripts is they're dysfunctional families.
Oh, wow.
They're arguing amongst themselves as well as with the other two text types. So, but my job is not to bash the Greek.
Right.
My job is to help the Greek, because there is an ancient version within these families of a Greek text that the Aramaic will point to and say, of all those variations, this is the one you need, right? And so it's the Greek's best friend, which is why I believe any serious student of the word needs to have that Aramaic tool to help the Greek text that they're familiar with and rely on.
Right.
And that's what we do.
Right. Makes great sense. Can you tell us how you came across these better manuscripts? Because I know that you did a translation of the scriptures of the New Testament from Aramaic, 15 years ago or so?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. But in the years in between that one and this one, you discovered much better manuscripts. Can you tell us how that came about? Because I think that's a fascinating story.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So basically what happened was this. Okay. In the early 2000s, the new wave of Aramaic scholarship was just beginning, and it was powered by the internet. Okay. That there were a few places that put manuscripts online that we could then study without having to go to the museums and get special permission, promise not to take photographs and not take the manuscript home and all this sort of stuff. We could see them online. It was a big deal.
Right.
But there was only 2 or 3 of them. So I did the best job that I could for the AE&T using something called the Kouboris Codex, which dates to about the year 1000. And then something called these 2 outlier manuscripts called Old Syriac, Sinaiticus and Curetonian. They were online. And then what was also online was their so-called critical text, where you sort of take the best readings in a whole bunch of manuscripts and you put out a unified text. So those were that's what I had to work with. Now, the thing is, because of the integrity overall of these manuscripts that I said are effectively identical, using, say, the Kouboris Codex was not a terrible thing, because it was doing what the other manuscripts did. But there were certain things that happened to individual manuscripts that were done for not so nice purposes to deliberately alter the word. And those stories also needed to be told, how they were trying to mess with it and change it. And for that, I needed to get more manuscript images, principally from the British Library, but also some from the Vatican, Cambridge, UK, and whatnot. As to how we got them, my colleague in Great Britain is a guy named Ewan MacLeod. You'll see him mentioned on the opening page of the Apostolic Writings. And Ewan MacLeod, he was buddy-buddy with people in the British Library who told him, he says, everyone thinks our manuscripts are locked away. Our ancient Aramaic texts are locked away, and they are. But before we lock them away, we put them on microfilm. And so Ewan very diplomatically said, is it possible for one to purchase copies of the microfilm? Maybe you make them into JPEGs or something. And they said, for you, yeah, we'll do a deal, right? Because if you ever meet Ewan, you'll see he's such an affable guy that it's really almost impossible to say no to him. It's his superpower. So what ended up happening was that he said to me, Andrew, I know you know the manuscripts that are in this collection. You've got their catalog. Tell me what you want, and I will order them. And he did. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of them that are in this chart section in the beginning of the book, right?
Yes.
One of those is probably what I call the most important one. It's called 14470. And 14470 has 22 of the 27 New Testament books all under one cover.
Wow.
Yep. More importantly, 14470, based on internal evidence, because they tried to mess with it, and when you figure out who is doing the tampering and why, all of a sudden the date gets earlier. And that's a whole long story we probably don't have time for. But suffice to say, conservatively, that manuscript goes back to about 390 CE.
That is amazing.
Yeah. And everything from that early witness to my last witness is functionally identical. Okay. So that's the Cadillac. That's the one that I rely on the most is 14470. But then they had other books in the British Library collection that were almost as old. Mm-hmm. And in terms of antiquity and quality, the British Library is better than the Vatican. They had older, better, reliable manuscripts because this one monastery in Egypt, which was a treasure trove, which had been buying manuscripts from other churches for centuries, the British crown got to that monastery and said, we're going to write you one big check with a lot of zeros on the end, but and you'll be pleased. All we want you to do is to bring them all out, every last little piece of them, and we will take the whole lot home to London. So they wrote the check. The monks were happy because they had a hard time maintaining the manuscripts, keeping them bound, getting track of loose pages that came apart, and all this conservation stuff that they have no knowledge or ability to do. And so they were promised, well, we'll take care of them in London. We'll put them in climate controlled things, and we'll have our experts piece them all back together. And that hoard was so massive, Gena. Just to give you an idea, it took 40 years for them to just do a catalog explaining what they had.
Wow.
40 years. So that's on the par of like how long it took the Dead Sea Scrolls for some of that stuff to come out, because you're talking about collections that are about as massive.
Right. It's just fascinating to me how Father Yahweh wanted to reveal to mankind information about his written word in the way and in the timing that he did, because so much of what you're talking about, there could have been a fire at that monastery,
right?
Like that happened at the Great Library in Alexandria, Egypt.
Yep.
And all of those Aramaic manuscripts could have been lost, but Father Yahweh preserved that. He preserved those. And technology made your apostolic writings a reality, because if you had to do all the traveling to England, other exotic locales to view dusty manuscripts, rather than accessing them over the internet, that would have been a very costly and time-consuming endeavor. And without the internet, well, I think I got my first Yahoo email account in the year 2000. So, it wasn't until the 21st century that the internet began to really be used as a tool to make these kinds of scholastic endeavors possible.
Absolutely.
And I just love that. Let's talk about the aspects of the books now, or actually, we'll just say the book, because they are so very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Most New Testament translations have the words spoken by Yeshua, the Savior, or Messiah, Jesus, written in red.
Yep.
An additional great feature that I've not seen in any other translation is how you use the color blue to indicate that the words, which were actually from the Old Testament, appear in the New Testament.
Exactly.
This tremendously helpful and fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, this was something that Jay and I had talked about, and I believe she came up with that idea, and we just sort of ran with it. And the running joke that we say about the apostolic writings is it's the most patriotic Bible that's ever come off the printing press, because except for the ink, everything's in red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
So a lot, although it's early, the people who have received a copy of this, they've looked at it and they've written back and said, wow, that's gorgeous. It really shows the way all that is coming together in the Messiah.
Yes.
That in addition to generating scripture, he's also referring to scripture. And also there are times when Father Yahweh talks directly in the New Testament those things are also in blue.
Yes, yes. Thank you for adding that. I remember that now that you mention it.
You know,
And
this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I think that feature really, not that the Tanakh needs elevating, but the Tanakh has been disparaged in recent years as being irrelevant
Right.
uh, in some religious circles. And this feature just shows how relevant it really is and how much of it we see quoted in the New Testament, which makes sense because the followers of Yeshua in the first century, it was the only scriptures they had. The Tanakh was the
Right.
only scriptures they had. So of course they would quote it, right? When
Exactly.
talking
They're
about
all Jews. What else are they going to quote? Like
right,
Babylonian
exactly.
oracles or, you know, Homer?
They're not going to quote Hammurabi, are they?
I hope not.
Another feature that I love is the expansive biographical, the expansive biographical information and introductions to each of the books. This section of each book tells us about the author and the circumstances of the people to whom the book was written, and other wonderful historical information that you've pulled from various sources. And I know that your lovely wife, Jay, helped you to craft these introductions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And she also served as one of your primary editors, right?
She's the editor in chief. You know,
Yeah.
she is very modest. It goes contributions, you know, I'll see how she actually puts it here. Contributions and editing by J. Sarah Roth. Well, yeah, if by contribution you mean from the very first word to the very last word, yeah, that's an accurate statement, you know.
Yes.
Because the thing is, I needed that help because I'm thinking like a translator. So
Right.
I'm like, okay, I got this Aramaic word over here, and it's got a depth of meaning, and I want to be accurate, to be in the center of that meaning. But there are certain nuances in English that you need to kind of get outside of your own head. You know, like if you're any kind of writer, you can get stuck in your own head, and
Yes.
you need the feedback of others to say, well, is it red or is it scarlet or is it crimson? You know, and in Aramaic there are words that are so precise that you can't quite fit it into an English term.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would talk about it, that there's one kind of promise, for example, it's called Molkanah, which is related to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But when it comes to the promises that say Yeshua, Jesus, gives to his apostles and to those who follow him, that's a different word for a promise.
Right.
Altogether. It's called Shudaya. So we found ourselves putting in parentheses, this promise is Molkanah, this promise is Shudaya, this is from the patriarchs, this is from Yeshua to the apostles and the world, because we found it made a world of difference in clarity to someone who is not in a position to know any Aramaic at all.
Right.
So she represented that reader and was like thinking about what she would like, you know, it to be for her, and thereby bring everyone with her. Right. And so that's sort of the secret sauce that really elevates this light years beyond my previous work.
Right.
Which you didn't help me on.
Right. And you know, I never got to have a copy of your previous work.
Mm-hmm.
I'd heard about it ever since I began to study in the Messianic movement, but it was out of print by the time I learned of its even existence.
Right.
And so I had been eagerly awaiting its successor. And that's why I was so eager. As soon as they became available, I ordered one right away. And I think I'm about 65 pages into the white version of the book.
Right.
And then, you know, there are those footnotes, your extensive footnotes. How many of them are there? Over 2,500?
Something like that. Very near 2,600. Yeah. Wow. That is 800 plus more than in the AE&T, my previous work. which is
Right.
hailed as a study Bible. And for the time, it was. But now with better manuscripts and improved features that weren't in the old book, this is not just the next step. This is a quantum leap above what came out 15 years ago.
Right, absolutely. One thing that mainline Christian readers would need to realize about the apostolic writings is, because I discovered this when I was first looking at my book, is that the books of the Brit Chadasha are not presented in the same order that one would find them in a version that's derived from the Greek. For example, after the book of Acts in the King James Version comes the book of Romans. But in the apostolic writings, which follows the Aramaic apostolic tradition, what comes after the book of Acts is the book of Yaakov or the book of James.
Right.
It makes the book order somewhat different. It's not fruit basket turnover, but it does make it somewhat different.
And there's a reason for that, because the Eastern tradition basically focused on who's in charge. Okay. So you're going to put the Gospels first because that's the ultimate commander, our Messiah. So he comes first. Then you're going to put the 12 and guys like Paul in the next thing, in Acts. But when you leave the book of Acts, Paul is kind of low ranking on the totem pole. I know a lot of people don't like to hear this. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Paul himself works. He delivers the apostles' mail. Okay, that's what he does. Just read Acts 15. There's James and Peter going, here you go, Paul. Just send these out. Be a good lad. Thank you. Right. I'm totally serious about this. And so the Eastern tradition recognizes this. And so they're going to put James next because he is the head of the Jerusalem assembly.
Yes.
In addition to being Yeshua's half brother, right? So right. Of course, James is going to be first there, right? And then he's got a brother, but Jude didn't make the cut into the Eastern canon. That's a whole other story. And then the next one's going to be Peter, right? And when you're done with Peter, then okay, Paul, you can come up and you can speak, right? And that's just the way it rolls. But, they're also going to put John before Paul,
Right, because John was one of the 12 apostles. And, Paul himself, lest anyone think we're beating up on poor Paul, Paul himself referred to himself as the least of the apostles.
I'm not worthy to be an apostle because I persecuted the members of the way to the death. Yeah. So right, Paul is actually on board with this.
Right.
Okay. Right. He may vent a little bit when he gets a little bruised, but he comes back to center, like that famous confrontation with him and with Peter in Galatians chapter 2, right? You notice how he says, I oppose Peter to his face and stuff like that.
Right.
But then when the delegation from James comes, and all of a sudden, what we find out is Paul doesn't win that argument. He doesn't win that argument. He vents, he expresses himself, and then, he basically moves on. But when he gets agreement, he'll stay in that scene. Like for example, he will say, they gave us the right hand of fellowship and all this other stuff. Yeah, let's go 3 chapters on that. But when he vents and nothing happens, and the delegation from Jerusalem doesn't say, yeah, Paul, way to go, all of a sudden, basically you have him like, well, I made my point and now I'm moving on.
Right.
So he does get back to center, but he's gonna make sure he stands his ground before he leaves it.
Right. And we can't take away from him that he wrote outside the Gospels. He wrote the majority of the books of the Brit Chadasha. I mean,
14 of 27. So yeah,
he was an extraordinarily gifted,
Mhm.
both humanly speaking, um,
Mhm.
but based on the family he was born into, the Pharisaical tradition he was born into,
Yes.
also the gifts of the Holy Spirit, a tremendously gifted leader and follower of Mashiach, uh,
Mhm.
Messiah. Um, Now you have a a supplemental section at the end of your master
Mhm.
work,
Yep.
and it comes after the Book of Revelation, appropriately. So, can you tell us about what topics you decided to include in the supplemental section? How did you come to choose those topics to complete this translation?
Well, basically, there just with the old AE&T, there was something called an appendix, and
Mhm.
everybody told me that they liked it. When we realized what a massive undertaking the apostolic writings was going to be, we realized that that would have to go in a separate book. There wasn't room.
Right.
So I had my old appendix text, and I had been working on it and replacing it with new research. This is for good 5 or 6 years. And all of a sudden, I had this extra body of stuff.
Mhm.
Now, as it turned out, Amazon kind of determined how much space we had at the end of Revelation. So at that point, we knew we would have plenty of articles left over for the commentary, but we could fill it out a little bit to give a better value for the reader. And so we tried to pick stuff that speaks to the majority of questions that that the readers have. And as I said, that commentary version is going to be published at a later time. I referred to that at the beginning
Right.
in 2025. But for now, we're working on having it published, hopefully with more of those articles in the back in the next few weeks for another version that's not here yet.
Great.
So in terms of how we selected those things, right? We looked at some things that were controversial and some things that we saw that were, being hotly debated. Like for example, there's articles about what Yeshua said from the cross, that
Mhm.
it wasn't my God, why have you forsaken me? It was basically, God, God, why have you spared me, from his native Aramaic. We
Mhm.
also dealt with some important messianic prophecies. We dealt with the topic of the rapture, what it is and what it isn't. And we also used the topic of the Shabbat as sort of an entry into the Torah observance of the Messiah, because for a lot of folks, when they're coming into this faith walk, as you well know, Gena, the
Yeah.
gateway to that is often just calling Saturday your day of rest, not Sunday.
Mhm.
Of course, you can go to church on Sunday. That's not a problem, but just don't call it Sabbath, because it's the first day of the week, not the seventh day of the week.
Right.
So we're trying to be representative of what that is, and we're working on sort of like the little blue version of the apostolic writings, that we're going to put a lot more of those things in the
Mhm.
back.
Gotcha. So that's going to be separate from the commentary volume,
Yeah,
correct? So
that's right.
the smaller version that's smaller in size and
Right.
smaller in print than this version here, or the white one. I just happened to hold up the blue one.
Right.
It's going to have a lot more supplemental information in the back, is what you're saying.
Well, we're trying to deal with a variety of situations to meet the needs of the different types of readers, that what we're doing for them. So, as I said, what's going to happen is, when we get that third volume out, it's going to have some additional things,
Right.
and basically, it's the smaller volume, I should say, of the blue, the reader's version, has the same number of articles, but we are going to try to get more out later.
Okay.
Okay.
That
And also when the ebooks come,
right.
we'll be looking at putting more stuff out there later, but that's not for now, as I said.
Right, right. I know that's something you're working on, probably after the fall feasts. You're really going to plunge into that
Yeah.
full,
Well,
full.
we're also getting ready to travel too. So
Yes, yes, right, exactly. So these books that are out now, they're almost 600 pages. They're quite massive, as people watching the video can see from when we've been holding them up. The next volume, the companion volume with the supplemental information in it, will that be as massive a volume, or do you see it being smaller in scale?
okay. Well, it's going to be small, clearly smaller in size. It's going to have the same amount of articles that the other ones do,
Mhm.
but basically, we're going to be looking at the commentary perhaps in the next few weeks. There's still some variables here, which is why I'm being, a little bit vague here. And the commentary will probably have another 300 pages
Okay,
of stuff that's not in the other volumes. But we plan to update everybody on this situation, which is in a bit of flux right
sure.
now. So I don't mean to give different different versions of this answer, but because it is an evolving situation.
Sure, sure. That makes sense. But it's fair to say that the companion volume would be roughly half of the length of the apostolic writings, you might say, if it's
Yes, it's projected. This commentary coming out apparently in the next few weeks, which is based on the latest information that I just got, uh, is going to be about 300 pages projected. Okay, and this is obviously 600 or very close to 600, so roughly half.
right, right. And just one more question about that, if you can answer it. When that work comes out, will there be clear references to what each article is addressing in the apostolic writings?
Yes, it will. It will. And there will also be, when you go through the apostolic writings, you'll see that there are references to certain articles that they can go to when that becomes available for more information.
Okay,
So
great.
it's cross tagging both ways.
Great, great. That is outstanding. Yeah, that is outstanding. Um, do you think that there's anything that potential believers, or I'm not saying that right, believers in Yeshua who potentially will get your book, can you think of anything they might find that they might consider a stumbling block to them? I don't mean a stumbling block, but something that they might not agree with? Or is there anything in the translation? I've not found anything that I felt was the case. But can you think of anything that might be troublesome to anyone who has been reading the Greek? You gave the example of Simon the leper
Right.
being translated as Simon the jar maker, and there's
Right.
another one that I've shared with people in the past about when the rooster crowed, right?
Right. That's another one.
Peter's denial. Yeah, that's another one, that it wasn't actually a rooster. And those are relatively what I would term small things. But there's nothing major theologically that anyone's going to bang their shins up against in the translation from the Aramaic, is there?
No, I don't think so. In terms of my understanding of how 95% of mainline Christianity works, there will, however, be surprises and things that they didn't see coming. And I think that is fair to say that that's the truth. Okay. So, when we're looking in the Aramaic and we find that, for example, there's a word in Aramaic that means both life and soul. And maybe they're used to it being translated one way, but it's actually the other way. And then there's another word that only means life. And then you have to figure out what kind of life. Is it life in this world? Is it life in the next world? And so there are going to be a number of those things that, because of the clarity, that what was obscure before all of a sudden will be clear. I think one of the best examples of this is what I call which Lord is Lord.
Mm-hmm.
That in the Greek and to a degree in the Hebrew too, it's unclear if the Lord is the Father or the Son or the angels or a human leader. It's kind of out there, right?
Yeah.
Remember, Yeshua said, "Is it not written that you say in the word that you are gods?"
Yes.
Playing on that vagueness, to the Pharisees to make a point.
Right.
The Aramaic is unique in terms of the fact that when it says Mar Yah, which you see all over the text, and Yah is in all caps, indicating this is not a title, this is his name, Yah. When you see Mar Yah, it only relates to the Father.
Right.
When you see Maran, our master, or Mari, my master, it always relates to Yeshua.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? So
Right.
knowing which Lord is Lord, I counted how many verses one of the other appears. It's 655 lines.
Wow.
Of the text. And I think it's really important to know which Lord is speaking. So, for example, in the book of Acts, when Paul gets struck blind, and this guy, Ananias or Hananiah, is caring for him, Hananiah is getting communication. It says, and the Lord spoke to him and said, this, and this. But what a lot of people don't know is that sometimes that Lord is the Father. And sometimes it's the Son.
Right.
Because the Aramaic will tell you when they switch speaking.
That's very helpful. And so in your front of your book here, you have kind of a glossary of terms.
Yeah.
And go over some of that, right?
Right. And it's just meant to be a representative list. It's obviously not a comprehensive list, but it's just to get people into the headspace of, you're entering a different language from a different language group, right? And you just have to, be aware that certain things are going to be, as I said before, in a different context, they're going to be surprising, going to be unexpected from what you're used to. But for those who really want to stay in the stuff they're familiar with, the Blue Book is more amenable for that purpose, right?
Sure.
And so that's why we offer those possibilities.
Right. Well, Andrew, I want to ask you, are you available to appear on other media outlets and or to travel and speak to groups about the apostolic writings?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I've had pleasant experiences with some of your broadcast partners over at Messianic Land, like Stephanie Pavlantos and some others. And while we're traveling and while it's feast season for us, which of course is a joyous time, but also a very busy time,
sure,
I'm going to do my best to make myself available to get the word out about the word.
Right. And I think that's great in the era in which we live. We're doing this interview in two separate cities, you and I. We just want to encourage people to check out these new masterwork translations from the Aramaic and contact Andrew if you would like for him to speak to your congregation, your assembly, or even to come in person. He'll certainly entertain that. And how do they get in touch with you, Andrew? Talk to us a little bit. For those who are unfamiliar about the other aspects of your work, tell us a little bit about how to contact you and about your website.
Okay. Well, the ministry email is onefaithandrew@gmail.com. So that's ONEFAITH, Andrew, ANDREW, @gmail.com. The website, not surprisingly, is One Faith, One People Ministries. That's plural, MINISTRIES.com, right? And what we do on the ministry website is we provide 3 to 4 hours on average of fresh biblical content every week. New videos every week about the weekly Torah reading or Parsha. And we also go over what we call the Haftorah, which is the reading from the prophets. And then we also do readings from the apostolic writings.
Right.
And all three sources are intertwined together, and they relate to each other. And they've been chosen and they've been carefully curated to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first video, I just read the Torah portion. Straight out with a little bit of commentary, just whatever comes off the top of my head.
Right.
The second video, we do the same thing for the prophets and for the apostolic writings. Third video, we do a deep dive into the linguistics. Because with Hebrew and Aramaic, there is a depth of the meanings of these roots and these words. And that does not get done quickly. Okay, it just doesn't. But if you want to know some of the deepest things that our Savior said and what he meant, then you need to stick around for the linguistics.
Sure.
For example, you take some of the rather shocking imagery of, and if your right eye offends, pluck it out. Right? People are like, what the heck is going on with that? Why would I need to pluck out my right eye? Well, that's not what he meant, folks. What he meant was remove sinful visions from your eyes as if you couldn't see with that eye.
Mm.
So otherwise, I don't know why other people aren't walking around with eye patches, So understanding those metaphors is a big part of what we do as well. And then the fourth video is basically the closest thing I do to a sermon, what we call the Torah Thought for the week. And I answer questions from our members because they always have questions. And it's a service that I reserve exclusively or certainly preferentially, for those who have invested their substance with us for either an annual or a monthly subscription.
Right.
But we also have a lot of free stuff up there too. All our feast teachings, for example, are free.
Right.
For all 7 feasts, there's a teaching for that's free. And special teachings like Star of Bethlehem and some other biblical topics of interest, those are free. So there's something for everybody there.
Great. Yes. I think that describes it very well. And it's a wonderful, wonderful resource, particularly if someone wants to follow the yearly schedule of Torah readings and Torah readings and so forth, but they can't get to a religious service that features that particular framework, that
Exactly.
particular framework. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Andrew. It's just been wonderful to talk with you. And I'm just very, very happy to see that this translation has been done and is out there and available to draw each of us closer to our Father and our Mashiach through his Spirit. And I've just been blessed already by my study so far in the book. And I know that it'll be a tremendous blessing to others as well. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to add today? Maybe something that I didn't cover in my questions or anything of that nature?
Well, I think you covered everything just very efficiently and very broadly, Gena. So as you always do. I will just add what I said at the beginning, that if you guys have an interest in this, please check out Amazon really soon, because we do not know how long those low half price cut is going to be.
Right.
And I wouldn't want anyone to feel like they didn't know, they weren't told, and stuff like that. So I'm saying that again, just for their benefit, because like I said, we're fine either way. But just please feel free to check that out. Check out my website and the free teachings on onefaith1peopleministries.com. And we're here to help you guys to go deeper into the scripture. That's our jobs. That's what we do.
Right.
That's just what I wanted to share.
All right. That's great. Well, again, thank you. And I pray that your Elul and your New Year and the fall feasts for you and your wonderful wife are a tremendous blessing. And we'll be praying that on your travels, that you're protected and kept safe, and that you have tremendous blessings that result from that as well. And I hope that we'll be able to do some more interviews later on down the road when we think we have something else to talk about.
Yeah.
And so again, thank you. And shalom, Andrew.
Shalom. Thank you, Gena.
And for those tuning in, we wish you a fond farewell until next time here on Mishkan Katan. When we return next week, after you viewed this video, we'll return to our original series that we were teaching on before this opportunity arose. All right. Have a great week, everyone. If you missed today's show or want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find the show and all the other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network. We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lambnetwork.tv website. I'm Gena Hood, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.